Parents are often terrified of the loud teenager, the slammed doors, the eye rolls, the "you don't understand," the sudden hatred of family plans, the arguments over curfew, clothes, friends, tone, freedom, privacy, screens, and the sheer fact of parental existence. Adults read all that noise as danger. Sometimes it is exhausting, immature, disrespectful, and in need of limits. But there is a more unsettling possibility that many parents do not consider until much later. The loud teenager may still believe the relationship is alive enough to fight inside. The quieter teenager can be harder to read. No huge drama, no obvious rebellion, no theatrical contempt. Just a gradual reduction of self. It's fine. Whatever. I don't care. They do what is required. They hand over enough information to keep the machinery moving. They're not causing scenes. And this is precisely why parents can miss the deeper rupture. Rebellion did not disappear because connection got stronger. Sometimes rebellion disappears because the teenager decided contact is no longer worth the effort. There is a difference between peace and disengagement, and many households mistake one for the other. Real peace has warmth in it. There is still friction, but also humor, spontaneity, visible opinion, some degree of emotional mess that tells you the person still expects to be received. Disengagement feels flatter. The teenager does not argue because argument no longer seems useful. They stop protesting rules, not because they agree, but because they have moved the important parts of themselves elsewhere. They comply strategically. They conserve energy. They keep family interaction inside the smallest possible emotional perimeter. This is not maturity in the healthy sense. It is often a relational adaptation. If honesty leads nowhere, if conflict only becomes lecture or control, if being known feels expensive, then silence becomes efficient. Adults experience the resulting quiet as relief. The teenager experiences it as withdrawal. Many parents accidentally make rebellion too costly. Every disagreement turns into a marathon. Every no from the teenager is treated as disrespect. Every challenge to the family story becomes a character issue. The adolescent tests a boundary, and instead of encountering firm but stable authority, they collide with emotional overreaction, personal offense, or endless justification. Over time, the teenager learns an important lesson. Expressing my real mind creates too much drag. It does not lead to understanding. It leads to escalation. So they stop offering the real mind. They offer what might be called a low-friction self, a version calibrated to move through the house with minimal damage. It can look impressive from the outside. The teen is calm. The teen is not difficult. The teen no longer pushes. But what many parents call respect is sometimes simply strategic emotional disappearance. The shift often happens in small moments. The teenager tries to explain why something feels unfair and gets interrupted halfway through because the parent already knows better. The teenager says they are struggling and receives a speech instead of contact. The teenager brings up privacy and the parent hears accusation. The teenager reveals an unpopular opinion and the room becomes morally heated rather than curious. The teenager shares hurt and gets told the feeling is dramatic, entitled, rude, ungrateful, or irrational. None of these moments alone has to be fatal, but repeated often enough, they teach a form of hopelessness. Not dramatic hopelessness, relational hopelessness. Nothing changes if I say it. Maybe less than nothing. Maybe I get punished for saying it. Once that conclusion settles in, silence starts to feel intelligent. This is why the teenager who stops rebelling can be in more trouble relationally than the one who still argues. The arguing teenager is still trying to influence the relationship. They still believe it matters whether you understand. Their anger may be ugly, immature, and exasperating, but inside that protest is a strange form of hope. The disengaged teenager has often spent that hope. They no longer expect to be met. They expect to be managed, corrected, monitored, maybe even loved, but not truly met. So they stop offering live material. Parents then say things like, "She's so much easier now," or "He finally grew out of all that drama," while quietly losing access to the person actually forming beneath the surface. A major cause of this quiet loss is the parental addiction to certainty. Teenagers are difficult for adults because they introduce ambiguity into the family. They are no longer small enough to control cleanly and not old enough to trust without fear. Parents often respond by doubling down on certainty. They interpret quickly. They explain themselves at length. They defend every rule as if ambiguity would collapse authority. But certainty can become suffocating. If the parent already knows what every protest means, already knows why the child acted that way, already knows what the lesson is, then the teenager's inner life becomes unnecessary to the conversation. And when your inner life is unnecessary, you eventually stop bringing it. Another factor is chronic monitoring. In highly controlled homes, classic rebellion often becomes inefficient. You cannot sneak out because of the cameras, tracking, notifications, and phone checks. You cannot hold certain boundaries because privacy itself has been reframed as suspicious. You cannot argue without a 40-minute lecture. So the teenager evolves. They stop rebelling behaviorally and begin rebelling psychologically. They move their realness out of parental reach. They share less. They become skilled at blandness. They keep their digital world cleaner, their answers shorter, their emotional exposures smaller. They are not transparent. They are simply hard to read. The parent misinterprets this as trustworthiness because there is so little visible conflict. In reality, the teenager has become legible only in the areas they no longer care about protecting. The good kid can be especially deceptive for this reason. There are adolescents who do well in school, stay out of obvious trouble, help at home, follow the visible rules, and still feel profoundly gone inside family life. They have learned that competence is the best camouflage. If they remain high-functioning, adults stop looking closely. Pain can hide beneath politeness for years. The teenager becomes emotionally self-sufficient, not because they are secure, but because needing too much from the family feels pointless or costly. Some of the most disconnected teenagers do not present as rebellious at all. They present as remarkably manageable. That manageability is often being purchased with self-silencing. Parents also miss the shift because they are using the wrong metric. They measure relationship quality by obedience, not by mutual access. Does the child do what they are told? Do they keep the schedule? Are the grades okay? Is there less overt conflict? But mutual access asks harder questions. Does your teenager volunteer genuine opinions that could disappoint you? Do they bring you embarrassment before you discover it elsewhere? Do they let you see confusion before it hardens into private strategy? Do they still risk emotional honesty in your presence, or only functional communication? These are better indicators of connection than smooth daily operations. A household can be highly functional and emotionally evacuated at the same time. The underlying psychology is simple and severe. Adolescents are constantly deciding where to place the self that is emerging. They place it where it can survive contact. If home is a place where the self is corrected faster than understood, then home gets the edited version. Peers get the raw version. Online spaces get the exploratory version. Fantasy gets the idealized version. Inner monologue gets the wounded version. The family gets logistics. This arrangement can persist for years without external crisis, which is why it is so dangerous. Everyone adjusts to the absence. The teenager appears fine. The parent feels grateful there is no disaster. Meanwhile, the relationship becomes increasingly administrative. So what does repair require? First, do not romanticize conflict, but do stop treating all conflict as failure. Some argument is evidence of engagement. The goal is not a silent house. The goal is a house where disagreement remains metabolizable. Second, shorten your reactions. Teenagers often stop talking, not because the parent is strict, but because the parent is exhausting. If every conversation becomes long, moralized, repetitive, or totalizing, the adolescent will protect themselves by reducing input. Third, stop reading every boundary as rejection. A closed door, a private friendship, an unpopular opinion, or a bad mood is not necessarily a referendum on your parenting. If you personalize too much, your teenager will have to choose between becoming themselves and preserving your equilibrium. That is an impossible burden. Fourth, create moments that are not about management. A large percentage of parent-teen contact becomes transactional. Rides, reminders, screens, chores, deadlines, safety updates, performance reviews disguised as concern. If there is no space in the relationship for low-stakes contact, you will only ever meet the child in regulatory mode. That makes honesty feel structurally unnatural. Fifth, learn to answer protest without humiliation. You do not have to agree. You do have to avoid turning every challenge into a spectacle of wounded authority. The teenager must know that their disagreement will not automatically be interpreted as disloyalty, disrespect, or evidence of bad character. Otherwise, they will save disagreement for places where personhood is cheaper. And perhaps most importantly, listen for resignation. It's whatever. Forget it. You wouldn't get it. It doesn't matter. Parents often hear these as teenage attitude. Sometimes they are the verbal edge of disengagement. The relationship is telling you it has become too effortful to keep trying for understanding. When you hear that, the answer is not to force another answer immediately. It is to become more interestingly calm. To say, in substance, I don't want you to feel that it's pointless to talk to me. I may not get it right quickly, but I want to be easier to be real with. That kind of sentence can reopen a door because it addresses the deeper problem, not just the surface tone. If you are already in the quiet phase, where the teenager is polite but far away, do not panic and start mining them for intimacy. Distance rarely responds well to pressure. Start by altering the climate. Fewer interrogations, less commentary on every visible detail. More respect for privacy that is not clearly dangerous. More moments of contact that do not demand disclosure. More evidence that the relationship can survive difference. Then, when appropriate, tell the truth about what you see. Not, why don't you tell me anything anymore? Which places the entire burden on the teenager. Something more adult. I've noticed you seem to protect a lot of yourself here. I want to understand my part in that, and I want to be safer to talk to. Many parents avoid language like this because it feels vulnerable. That vulnerability is often exactly what restores credibility. There is a remarkable paradox at the center of adolescence. The teenager does not need a parent who surrenders authority. They need a parent strong enough not to confuse authority with emotional dominance. They need someone who can set limits without requiring the child's interior surrender. Someone who can tolerate disagreement without collapsing into fragility or war. Someone who can remain interested after being disappointed. When teenagers have that, rebellion often becomes less destructive because it no longer has to carry the whole burden of self-preservation. Without that, silence becomes a logical adaptation. It is cheaper than conflict and safer than honesty. And if this helped you see why the quiet house is not always the healthy house, subscribe. This channel is for people who want to understand family dynamics beneath the obvious surface, where distance often forms long before anyone names it. And send this video to one person truly close to you. Someone with whom you want to build healthier, more intelligent relationships with the children in your lives. Sometimes the most important intervention is not forcing a teenager to talk. It is changing the emotional price of speaking. Because you do not usually lose a teenager when they are loud. You often lose them when they conclude that being loud changes nothing, and being real costs too much. The silence that follows can look like peace, but very often it is the sound of a relationship being left from the inside. There is another clue parents should watch for: the disappearance of low-stakes spontaneity. The disengaged teenager often stops offering the random things that make a relationship feel alive. The odd observation from school, the joke with no point, the half-formed opinion, the song they almost showed you, the complaint that is really a bid for closeness. When those little offerings disappear, the family can still look intact, because the visible responsibilities continue. But those small bids are often the first casualties of a home that has become too managerial, too reactive, or too emotionally expensive. Their absence matters. It means the teenager has stopped expecting delight, curiosity, or relief from ordinary contact. Parents sometimes respond to this by becoming more impressive. They offer more advice, better logic, stronger speeches, more polished explanations. Usually, what is missing is not parental intelligence. It is parental receivability. The teenager is not asking, at least not first, whether you have the perfect perspective. They are asking whether their unfinished self can enter the room without immediately becoming a case to solve. That is why so many repair efforts fail. They arrive as content when what the relationship lacks is texture, more steadiness, more room, less victory-seeking, more signs that honesty will not instantly trigger the machinery of control. And one day, the child who once went quiet may surprise you. They may tell the truth again, or reveal pain you did not know was there, or bring you an opinion sharp enough to disappoint you, or ask for help in a tone that contains both courage and caution. When that moment comes, do not celebrate too quickly, or turn it into proof that everything is fixed. Treat it like what it is, a test of whether the relationship is becoming safe enough for real life again. Receive it carefully. That is how trust grows back. Not through dramatic speeches, but through the repeated experience that contact no longer costs so much.